the tenets of leadership. And when we say transformational leadership, at the very heart of leadership, the very core of leadership, or we can call it the very nucleus of leadership, is transformation. So let us look at this science and how we can implement it, because my belief is that each one of us over here, all of us, whether we are teachers, academicians, trainers, or coaches, we are the ones who influence minds. When we conduct training programs as trainers, we say that we are leading a training program. We are influencing so many minds. Therefore, we are leaders actually, absolutely and truly. And we are the ones who hold this power to transform the minds of people and transform the results of people. How can we take it to the next level? That is what we are going to look at in this presentation. Well, I had around 80 minutes, 60 minutes to our presentation, which my humble request, my humble submission to this great audience is that we will go non-stop for 60 minutes, and then we have 20 minutes for discussion, question and answers. That is because the flow should remain undisturbed. Here we talked of leadership, not necessarily at the national level. It can happen at any level. It can happen at the family level, at the club level, at the social level, at the business level, at the corporate level, even at the national level. One need not necessarily be an official leader. It isn't necessary that we have the position of a leader. A person could be a leader by position, but he might actually not be a leader. And he might actually be a leader. As I said, transformational leadership to the base, that is performance. A good leader is one who can create a difference in impact, who can create a difference in results. Results are X, and a leader moves from X to 3X. The results are Y, Y to 7Y, or Z to 10Z. This change, this flux, this transformation, this metamorphosis marks a good leader or a performing leader from a non-performing one. In fact, as I said, the very heart, the very soul, the very crux, the very nucleus is performance. A leader is one who can create a change in the performance, that is the results. We say the mark or the hallmark of a leader is, can he take performance from one level to another? Can he increase the performance, augment the performance, strengthen the performance, bolster the performance, intensify the performance, magnify the performance, amplify the performance? That is what sets a good leader apart from regular or normal players. When a leader is able to impact performance, that time we say creating performances. One is impact on himself, and second is impact on the country. Because when leaders, or we as leaders, impact so many minds, influence so many minds, take them to a different level, we are producing a country of performers. A country of performers is a performing country. A country of winners is a winning country. A country of achievers is an achieving country. A country of leaders is a leader country. A country of greats automatically translates into a great country. That's what I'm saying, friends. We have a great responsibility as teachers, as trainers, as academicians, as coaches. One is we become great. We make our teams great. We make the members in our team great. But above all, we are making the country great. We move towards becoming great, and we are taking the country towards becoming the greatest. Now, when I say the greatest, I'm reminded of the man who called himself the greatest. I am the greatest was the punchline of this man, was the tagline, was the identity of this man. Yes, here on the screen in front of you, I am the greatest, said this man. Goes down in history as sportsman of the century. Some call him sportsman of the millennium. The only man to have won the world heavyweight title, not once, not twice, but 3 times. He defended the world heavyweight boxing title 19 times. And that is the world record even today. Yes, I know we are talking of the great Muhammad Ali, born Cassius Clay, 17th of January 1942, Kentucky, Louisville. 2 times he had been the world champion. The year was 1978. Ali was almost 37 years old. In a state of semi-retirement, he was in boxing activity. He was in no physical shape. He was in no mental shape. Semi-retirement, almost out of boxing, and then a new man in the world of boxing challenged him. His name was Leon Spitz. He was a young boxer. He was a big boxer. He was a God-gifted boxer and he challenged Muhammad Ali. And against all odds, against all preparation, against all logic, Muhammad Ali picked up the challenge. And everybody said that Ali stands no chance because he's out of shape. Physically, he's out of shape. Mentally, he's out of shape because he's not in the world of boxing right now. Experts, projections, predictions, prophecies were that Muhammad Ali is not even going to last 3 rounds. And then the day dawned. Millions of dollars running on the fight. Leon Spinks challenges Muhammad Ali for the world title once again. And the favorite is Leon Spinks. Madison Square Garden. Tickets sold out. Millions of dollars running on the fight to be telecast, to be televised in 80 countries across the world, across the globe. And the fight started. Round number 1, Ali is being beaten. Round number 2, he's being clobbered. Round number 3, Ali is black and blue. And round number 4, knockout. And who's knocked out? The younger boxer is knocked out. The bigger boxer is knocked out. The favorite is knocked out. The God-gifted boxer is knocked out. Leon Spinks is knocked out. And Muhammad Ali is the world champion for the 3rd time. Ali stands in the ring. The record remains to this day. And he utters his punch. His trademark line, he says, I am the greatest, because he's angry. He's giving an answer to all those experts who said Ali will not last 3 rounds. He looks around. He's cocking a snook at all those who said Ali will not last even 3 rounds. I am the greatest, says Muhammad Ali. And then a reporter walks up, white reporter. We know that whites had never liked Muhammad Ali because Ali espoused the cause of the blacks. He says, fine Ali, we agree you're the greatest. We agree Ali, but tell us, this desire to be great, when was it born in you? In your childhood or after you grew up? Come on, Ali, tell us, Muhammad Ali. Now, Ali was a man sharp of body. He was sharp of mind also. He realized that the white reporter is pulling his leg. And he said, hot reporter, to be great, desire alone is not enough. Along with desire, you need vision. Along with desire and vision, you also need ambition. This desire, this vision, this ambition needs to be backed up by skill. Not only skill, also will. And the will is more important than the skill, because the will works upon a desire, making it a broad-based vision. Further working upon this vision, making it a burning ambition. Reporter, only when the burning ambition is there, the fire is there in your gut, the fire is there in your belly, the fire is there in your intestine, will you walk the path of greatness. Don't ever say, reporter, that desire alone is enough to become great. And what a reply and what an answer. And in this answer, the great man has given us a definition of becoming the greatest. He gave us the 2 prime qualities, that is skill and will. Well, friends, about the will aspect, we take a leaf out of the great man's book. Skill and will, he said, if we have to become great or the greatest. And that is what we aspire to be, great leaders, all of us. And we aspire to take our country towards becoming the greatest by influencing so many minds. So we talked of will and skill. Now, when we talk of will, all of us are in this profession because of our own desire, of our own aptitude. So on the will part, no, I will not say anything. Yes, but on the skill part, well, if we understand an algorithm, by means of which leadership becomes easy. As I said, the science of leadership. Let us look at that algorithm. There are plenty of algorithms. The situational leadership by Hersey and Blanchard. The leadership grid. The Barely model, the Ross model. In fact, friends, my own doctorate has been in the subject of leadership. But then today we look at one man who created transformation in the corporate world. That is where I come from. When we say leadership, we look at 3 worlds or 3 dimensions where the results are immediately visible. One is the armed forces. Second is the corporate world. And third is sports. Win or loss, victory or vanquish, that is there in front of everybody. So we look at somebody who transformed the corporate world or his company in the corporate world. Yes, friends, on the screen in front of you, Jack Welch. Transformation in General Electric. 1981 was the year. General Electric, today it is a powerhouse, but at that time it was tottering. It was staggering. It was faltering. In the red, it was about to be closed down. It was making losses. It was, and then Jack Welch became the CEO and MD. And 1981, 40 billion US dollars. And when he relinquished, when he gave up or when he resigned, that time the turnover was 400 billion US dollars. So that is 1000% growth in a span of 19 years. And General Electric today remains a powerhouse. From a corporation that was about to be closed. And Jack Welch, what happened of the man? Well, the man passed away in March this year, 2020. But in the meantime, he's been celebrated as a speaker in the world circuit, speaks across the world. And his books on leadership have become Bibles on leadership across the world. This on the screen in front of you, Jack Welch talking on leadership. Jack Welch talking of his transformation of General Electric from a tottering organization to a powerhouse that it is today. And he says, leadership, I say, he says there are simple steps. I can give you science, I can give you logic. I can give you steps, I can give you chronology. I can give you a formula, I can give you an algorithm. And this algorithm, say Jack Welch, is V plus 5E. V plus 5E is equal to leadership. V plus 5E is equal to transformation. If these dimensions, 5V's and 1V, the 6 dimensions are displayed by a leader, that leader will become unstoppable. Nobody can stop that leader from giving results, which is transformation in its core form, in its hardcore form. So we look at these dimensions. And as we said, we are dedicating today's webinar or today's program to our great country. We look at great sons of India, great leaders of India. Each leader has displayed one of these dimensions and he has written his name in the history books. How he wrote his name, that we will understand. And if we pick up that dimension, make it a part of our mindset, our thought process, our psyche, we pick up all these 6 dimensions, make it a part of our psyche. I can assure you, friends, that as leaders, we become unstoppable and we will create great results. But the greater part or the bigger part is that results for the country will be even greater. We talk of V plus 5V. I begin with V. Today, our country, as we dedicate this webinar to our great India, our Bharat, or Hindustan, as I prefer to call it. Today, we are a respected name. We are doing well because our economy is doing well. And we get a lot of respect. 7 months back, our Prime Minister was there in the US and he entered a gathering where there were heads of state of all other countries. And we all know what happened that day when our Prime Minister enters. All the heads of state gather up to receive him. That is the kind of respect India receives. That is because India's economy is strong. But friends, 70 years back, 73 years back, our economy was not strong. 1947, we were a very weak country. We were a poor country. Our economy was in shambles. We were one of the poorest countries in the world. Yes, 15th of August 1947, we got independence. Before that, we were ruled for 190 years by the British. Our white rulers, our English rulers, our British rulers. We were ruled by them. And that time, you know how we were treated. Our economy was bad. Our condition was bad. And our treatment was bad. 1947, we gained independence. The year was 1898. The British Raj was at its charam. And today, I speak to all of you, a great audience in front of me, from the city of Mumbai. Mumbai at that time was called as Bombay, 1898. The Raj was at its peak and it was the biggest hotel in Bombay that day, which was decked up, which was decorated. And that hotel, friends, was the Watson Hotel. The Watson Hotel was decorated because it was hosting the wedding reception of the daughter of the governor of Bombay Presidency. The governor of Bombay Presidency was a big man because Bombay Presidency was what? It was the state of Maharashtra plus the state of Gujarat plus the province of Sindh in Pakistan plus the state of Telangana in India. That was Bombay Presidency. He was a big man, number 2 in India. And his daughter's reception, big people are invited. 95% were whites, only 5% were Indians. But we also can understand that those 5% Indians were the well-heeled ones. They were the famous ones. They were the wealthy ones. They were the moneyed ones. The reception was to begin at 9 o'clock, 9 p.m. in the night. And at 8:45, the first guest was standing at the gate of the Watson. He was an Indian and he was an Indian industrialist. He started crossing the gate. That industrialist was known for his punctuality. Therefore, he was there 15 minutes before time. He started crossing the gate and he was stopped by the Darban, the watchman. The watchman said, "Sir, wait, you cannot go inside." What happened, watchman? He says, "Sir, look at the board over there." And the board said, "Dogs and Indians not allowed. Kutton aur Hindustaniyon ka andar aana mana hai." That man got agitated. He said, "Watchman, I have an invitation. I am an Indian, but I have an invitation." The watchman said, "Sir, I have an instruction. Dogs and Indians will not be allowed." That man, that Indian industrialist got upset. He opened his briefcase, took out the invitation, and he said, "Yeah, watchman, look here. This is the invitation." The watchman went to his table, came back with a paper, and he said, "Sir, look here. Here is the instruction. Dogs and Indians to be thrown out." That man got even more upset, even more angry, even more agitated. He said, "Watchman, I was personally invited. I was personally called on telephone by the governor. I've been personally invited." The watchman started laughing. He said, "Sir, 2 hours ago, the governor was over here for supervision. And personally, he has instructed me that dogs and Indians will have to be thrown out. Sir, if you don't go out, I'll have to get you thrown out from here. That man realized that it's a deliberate insult. First, I've been called over here, and now I'm being asked to go away. But he went away. He says, went away. But he made a promise to himself that I will give an answer. And he started working on his answer. And his answer, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months. No, it took 5 years. And that was the pledge, the promise, that oath that Indian industrialist made unto himself. And the historic date, 16th of December 1903, the answer was there. Here on the screen in front of you is the answer. It is, what is it? It is the Taj Hotel, the Taj Palace Hotel, the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel. And that was the answer. It was standing across the gateway of India next to the Watson Hotel it stood. And what a building it was. Huge, it was big, it was great, it was grand, it was majestic, it was magnificent, it was opulent, it was. And what was the rating at that time? It was rated and ranked as the best hotel in Bombay at that time, the best hotel in India at that time, the best hotel in Asia at that time. Number 2 in the world at that time was the Taj Palace Hotel, and it stood next to the Watson Hotel across the gateway of India. And what happened to the Watson Hotel? The Watson paled in comparison, looked shabby in comparison, looked small in comparison, looked tiny in comparison, looked puny in comparison, looked old in comparison, looked outdated in comparison, looked dated in comparison, looked obsolete in comparison. The identity of the Watson hit the dust, bit the dust. It was ground into the dust by the Taj Palace Hotel. Every Indian at that time used to take a lot of pride in the Taj Palace Hotel. Every Indian, they say, used to stop over there, bow down, pay obeisance at the gate of the Taj Palace Hotel and move ahead in Bombay. About the Taj Palace Hotel, it was said in those days that India hits back, India fights back, India strikes back, India answers back, Indians answer back on behalf of all Indians. One Indian answered back, our white masters, our British masters, our English masters, our colonial masters, our European masters. And on behalf of all Indians, that Indian who answered back, Jamshedji Tata, founder of the Tata Group of Industries. 3rd of March 1839, Navsari, South Gujarat, this great man was born. It was his vision for India, for his group, because he said, 19th century India, we all know freedom fighters were active. But he said, India, yes, we have to be free, but for our political freedom to survive, we need, apart from political freedom, we need economic freedom. For economic freedom, we need an economy. For economy, we need industry. And for industry, we need steel. And I will give steel to India, said he. And in the face of all opposition from our British masters, no help from them, he went to America, came back with metallurgists, came back with geologists, scouted across the full country and eastern India. A place called Sachi, the first plant was set up, steel plant for India. Today, Sachi is called as Jamshedpur. Well, friends, that was his vision for India. The destiny of Tata Group and the destiny of India connected, interconnected, intertwined with each other. Yes, political freedom is a must. It is imperative, it is necessary, it is compulsory, it is mandatory. But for that to survive, our country needs economic freedom. That was the vision of this man. And then that is how he set up his group. And today, what a group it is. Salt to software conglomerate. Presence in 165 out of 196 countries of the world. 7 lakh plus employees across the world. 132 companies in the Tata Group. 28 listed on the stock exchange Tata Group. Assocham says India's most reliable brand. Assocham says number 11 power brand in the world is brand Tata. Well, that was the vision of this man for his group, for his industry, and for his country also. Well, friends, that is what we are seeing. The V of a leader. That is the vision, the ability to look far. A leader has got to look far. And what is the long-term goal? What is the long-term direction? What is the long-term destiny? That is what the leader gives to his team members. And this depends upon his passion also. A leader should understand his passion. Do I have the wherewithal to go the distance? Long-term direction. Tell the team. Tell to the team and sell to the team. Everybody should be told and then sold. Because once the team accepts the idea, the vision of the leader, then it doesn't remain a vision of the leader. It becomes a movement, it becomes a revolution. It becomes taken up by the team members, by the masses. And we see revolutions happen. Ask all the Lenins, ask all the Martin Luther Kings, ask all the Nelson Mandelas of revolutions are created when a vision is sold to everyone. But friends, again, when we are leading our corporates, our teams, our clubs, our families, many times we are guilty. We don't tell the vision to the junior most member. We feel that it should remain in the charmed inner circle of the top echelons. Every person must be told the vision, especially the junior most. That sense of purpose has got to be there in everybody. It is only then that it becomes a mission from God. It is only then that it becomes a revolution. So, friends, here we are talking of the first week. And this son of India, this industrial leader of India, Jamshedji Tata, who made our country proud. Today, when we stand with our head held high in the world fraternity, our economy is doing well. We also know that our foundations, our base, our bedrock was strengthened by bolsters, was bolstered, was built up by the steel which has come from the towns. And even today, very much standing for our country, their values and their systems. We take our journey ahead. E number one of a leader, that is energy. Again, I show you something because I said I will dedicate this talk to India today. Leaders of India, sons of India, who have made the country proud. And friends, if they have made it, we make a package out of their individual dimensions and we also move on the same path, becoming great and making our nation the greatest in the bargain. Here it is, 16th of December, once again, historic date. I would want all of us to remember this date. 68 years after we answered our colonial masters, this was our answer to our neighbors on our northwestern front. Yes, the biggest martial victory in the last 500 years, the defeat of Pakistan, the surrender of Pakistan. General Niazi, Amir Abdullah Khan Niazi of Pakistan, signing the document of surrender to General Jagjit Singh Arora of India. We took 93,008 POWs, prisoners of war, and therefore it is called the biggest military victory in the last 500 years. This day saw the birth of a new country, Bangladesh. It was called East Pakistan before that, we know it. The hero of this victory, the leader, another great son of India, Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw. Well, friends, here is the autobiography of Sam Manekshaw. The name is Soldiering with Dignity. And what does he say in this? He says, this victory wouldn't have been possible. A very interesting anecdote I must share with you because this stands for leadership in its purest form. In its rawest form, he says, tension was rising. Pakistan and India, West and East Pakistan. If I put it very succinctly, very briefly, elections were held in December 1970. Western Bloc Pakistan, that was in Pakistan. Western Bloc, the vote got divided. East Pakistan, dominated by Bengali Muslims, voted as one. And the biggest party was Awami League, the leader Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, father of the current day Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina. West Pakistan, dominated by Punjabi Muslims and Pathans, the vote got split. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman said, made me the Prime Minister. My party is the biggest. But West said, how can that be? We are superior to you. We will rule you. We cannot make you the Prime Minister. He said, I must. And agitations began. In response, what did West Pakistan do? 22nd of March 1971, Operation Searchlight was launched. The army of Pakistan, dominated by Punjabi Muslims and Pathans, was unleashed on the helpless, hopeless population of East Pakistan. And the language of the army, torture, loot, arson, killings, plunder, and rape. And what was the result? The result was that the people of East Pakistan started running away from their own army. They started fleeing from their own army. There was only one safe haven, and that safe haven was India. They started entering India. First, it was a trickle, 5 or 10 in a day. Refugees, trickle of refugees became a stream. Stream became a rivulet. Rivulet became a river. River became a deluge. The deluge threatened to become a tsunami because by the time it was July of 1971, there were 1 lakh refugees coming into India every day. And we had a population of 75 crores and tension rose. Tension became very high. It was the 8th of July 1971. Commander-in-Chief, Eastern Sector, Pakistani Army, General Niazi, here signing the document of surrender. He was sitting in his office in Dhaka And the reporter of the Time magazine walked up to him and he said, General Niazi, why don't you hold back your army? Why should I hold back my army, said General Niazi. He said, there could be war. War with whom, said Niazi. War with India, sir, India, of course. And Niazi's answer was, India, Indians, who is afraid of these Indians? In the last 1,000 years, India hasn't won a single war and we haven't lost a single war. 1000 सालों में इन्होंने कोई जंग जीती नहीं और हमने कोई जंग हारी नहीं. The answer was vain. It was pompous, it was bombastic, it was arrogant. And the Time magazine reporter published it in the Time magazine. It was published in the papers, newspapers across the world. It was published in India also. Writes Sam Manekshaw, Field Marshal, in his autobiography says, on the 9th of July, the next day, I was summoned by the Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi. She put the papers in front of me and she said, Sam, get into East Pakistan tomorrow, 10th of July, and teach Niazi a lesson. This is what he says. Sam Manekshaw says, my answer was something which Mrs. Gandhi was not expecting. My answer was, Madam, we are sure to be defeated if we get into East Pakistan. He says, stunned, shocked, appalled, baffled, surprised, befuddled she was because she never took no for an answer. She was so powerful at that time, she was called the only man in the Indian cabinet. She never took no for an answer. She got angry. She was staring at me. It seemed as if she was throwing fire from her eyes, spewing fire from her eyes. And he says, I felt as if the ground is slipping from below my feet. I looked back at her. It became a staring match. But he says, I summoned all my courage and then I supported my answer. I gave my reasons. I said, yes, madam, I have 3 reasons. Reason number 1, I need more time for preparation. Reason number 2, right now it is raining torrentially in East Pakistan. My soldiers are not used to fighting in marshes. Number 3, let the monsoons pass, let the winters set in. The Himalayas will be snow-capped and yellow friends of the Pakistanis. Read the Chinese will not be able to come in to help the Pakistanis. He says, I looked at her, I supported my answer, I substantiated my answer, I authenticated my answer, I validated my answer. And he says, I looked back at her, a staring match it was, and he says she blinked. She blinked and I had my way. We did not get into East Pakistan. The dates passed. Dates increased, tension increased, and he says, 3rd of December, tension was so high that Pakistan snapped. 3rd of December, they launched Operation Genghis Khan. 6 airports were bombed in India in a span of 1 hour. Number 1, Agra was bombed. Number 2, Avantipur was bombed. Number 3, Ambala was bombed. Number 4, Jodhpur. Number 5, Jaisalmer. Number 6, Srinagar. Complete war, all-out war, total war with Pakistan. 3rd of December 1971, and within 13 days, this was the result. Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw delivered for India the defeat of Pakistan, the surrender of Pakistan, the humiliation of Pakistan, the bisection of Pakistan, the dissection of Pakistan, the creation of a new country, Bangladesh. Well, friends, this wouldn't have been possible if Sam Manekshaw did not have the conviction, the belief, or the courage to answer back the Prime Minister, who was so strong at that time that she was called the only man in the Indian cabinet. So here we come, friends, Z number 1 of a leader, that is energy. It is power of conviction, faith in your abilities, faith in your decision, faith in your vision. If a leader falters from his vision, what will his followers think of it? If he gives up his vision at the drop of a hat? So that power of belief, that power of conviction has got to be there in a leader. He shouldn't waver, he shouldn't falter, he shouldn't give up his vision. It is only then that the followers remain steadfast. We come across so many leaders in the corporate world, in our clubs, in our friend circles, who give up their vision and therefore teams don't succeed. That is number 1. We can look at energy from another angle also, and that is, who likes a dull leader, a morose leader? It is only an energetic leader that people like. People are attracted to energetic people, energetic leaders. So the leader should give out energy, effuse energy, emanate energy. He should be a fountainhead of energy. And what kind of energy? Good energy, real energy, absolute energy, total energy, lethal energy, potent energy, positive energy. Right. So we are talking of this energy of leader, which is an imperative if we have to succeed as leaders. We saw V plus 1 E. We look at the second E, energize. Second E of leadership. Right now we talk of the corporate world. This is a brand which is loved by all of us. A Royal Enfield Bullet. We have grown up idolizing, eulogizing. this brand. But I must tell you, friends, today we are proud. It has been declared a cult brand, the longest motorcycle brand in continuous production because it is in production since the year 1901. Cult bike, even ahead of Harley Davidsons and Triumphs and Nortons. But then, if we understand that this bike was about to shut shop, about to become extinct, the year was 2003. Aisha Motors had taken over Royal Enfield. But then the sales of Royal Enfield, or Enfield India as it was called at that time, were declining. 1,500 motorcycles per month to break even. They needed 10,000. And the answer, the decision of the board of Aisha Motors in 2003 was, let us shut down this business because it is taking away from our energy, from our money, from our finances, from our very basics. But then that day, for the first time, in the board meeting was that young son of Mr. Vikram Lal, who was the MD of Aisha Motors. His name was Siddharth Lal, whose photograph you can see in the corner. But here it is, Siddharth Lal. And then he said, no. He says, we will give a chance, we will give a shot to Royal Enfield. We have 15 businesses, he says. We will divest 12 and only 3. We will merge 2 of our truck businesses and 1 Royal Enfield. We will focus only on 3 businesses. And he says, Royal Enfield, you can leave up to me. And against all his seniors, Siddharth Lal stood up and he says, Royal Enfield responsibility is mine. And he took up the charge, he took up the reins, he took up the leadership of Royal Enfield. And he says, when I went to the plant, I saw the employees, the people in the office, dull, morose, lifeless. They themselves had no faith that Royal Enfield can come to life. He says, the first thing that I did, that difference is, I gave up my Mercedes and I started coming to office to my plant in the Royal Enfield. He says, I started making acquisitions, plants as well as people. I picked up people from competitors, from Norton, from Triumph, from Ducati in Italy, and I had my offices set up in different countries, America, Canada, UK, Italy, the design center. And he says, all my seniors, I made them give up their cars, that everybody will ride a bullet to office. And he says, that is how I built up that confidence. Those energy levels in my team members. And then he says, from 2004, my turnaround started. And what a turnaround it has been, friends. One of the biggest success stories in the corporate world, the pride of India. One of the biggest turnarounds, Royal Enfield rose, step by step it rose. And December 2019, Royal Enfield was selling 70,000 motorcycles per month. From 1,500 to 70,000 motorcycles per month. October 1973, Siddharth Lal was born. Young man was 30 years old when he took charge as the leader of Royal Enfield and he turned things around. And he says that was only because I was able to take some tough decisions, number one. Second, I was able to pump up that energy in my employees. If they had lost energy, how would I have done it? So friends, here it is. Energize, inspire, motivate, charge, recharge, rejuvenate the team member. That is the mark, that is the hallmark, that is the print, that is the imprint of a successful leader. Can you build up that positive energy in his team members? One corporate world, sports world, political leadership, national leadership, leadership at the family level. What do we do? Well, we look at some basics. We remove demotivating factors. Friends, what is hygiene? What is basic? That should be given to it. Number one. Second, a leader should ensure equality. A leader cannot play favorites, partiality, but there is a human bias. Many times we fall into a trap. High performers become likable. We must ensure complete equality. If our team has to survive as one, if it has to remain as one, and if it has to perform as one, a leader should be able to manage conflict. Many times, if there is equality, if demotivating factors are removed, many chances of conflict are removed. We've got many models of conflict management, but that is not our day-to-day, right? We conduct so many training programs on conflict management. We also understand what each person wants. One fallacy where a leader believes every team member should align to my style, and friends, that is a fallacy in the truest sense. A leader has got to align to the styles of everyone. Every member is different. They must understand what does he want. Somebody wants recognition. Somebody wants credit. Somebody wants a pat on the back. Somebody wants money, that is finance. A leader should be able to understand every member by the back of his hand. And he has to align himself according to his team members. And then see how the team remains motivated. And a motivated team performs and delivers. Friends, these are tough results. Call it Sam Manik show energy. Call it Siddharth Lal, young leader, 30-year-old leader. But tough decisions have got to be taken by leaders sometimes. Even as I say this to this great team of a great audience, I am reminded of a couplet which I devote, which I dedicate to this wonderful audience in front. मुश्किलों से भागना आसान, मुश्किलों से भागना आसान होता है, जिंदगी का दूसरा नाम ही इम्तिहान होता है। मुश्किलों से भागना आसान होता है, जिंदगी का दूसरा नाम ही इम्तिहान होता है। बुज़दिलों के हाथ कभी न लगा कुछ, बुज़दिलों के हाथ कभी न लगा कुछ, हिम्मत वालों के कदमों में तो जहान। कभी कभी वो हिम्मत दिखानी पड़ती है। Those tough decisions have got to be taken by leaders. We move ahead. Move ahead. Our journey moves. Our caravan moves. E number 3, that is H. And here another leader, another captain, another skipper, another great son of India in front of you, Kapil Dev Nikhanj. Tunbridge Wells. This is autobiography straight from the heart. And Kapil Dev recounts a very interesting episode. He says, I was born on the 6th of January 1959, Chandigarh. I was made the captain for the Prudential World Cup campaign in 1983. June 1983, I was declared captain. He says, I was 24 years and 6 months. We went to England, and he says, I was the captain, but there were 2 ex-captains in the team. Everybody else in the team, barring 2 members, was senior to me. I was almost the juniorest. And he says, I encountered as leader, as captain, as skipper, a strange problem, a weird problem in England, because people had ego problems. They were not willing to listen to me. That was a very odd problem, he says, but then I was fighting it out. He says we were not doing well because I was captain only ex officio. Only on papers, nobody listened to me actually. And he says something strange happened. We did not play good cricket. But he says other countries played worse cricket, and by chance, we were there in the quarters, in the quarterfinals, we were there up against a young team, Minnows, Zimbabwe, Andy Flowers team. They were Minnows, they had just got test tickets. I walked up to my team members and I said, this is our chance, we can make it to the semis. But I said, team members, friends, let us not take Zimbabwe lightly. Let us put our best foot forward. But he says, once again, my word was taken lightly. And he says, within 20 minutes, we were reduced. 17 for 5 was the score against Zimbabwe. And he says it would have been a humiliating defeat. Humiliating exit from the World Cup. I tried to look around in the dressing room, try to tell my boys, my team members, what is happening. But he says again, nobody was in a mood to listen to me. Then he says, I decided enough is enough. He writes in his autobiography. He says, I promoted myself in the batting order by 1 number. I padded up, I put on my pads, and I said, now, I will not do the talking, my bat will do the talking. And I says, I walked out. 18th of June 1983, it was, he says, Tunbridge Wells was the win. And he says, then my bat did the talking. And what a talking the bat did, friends. It was raining 4s. It was raining 6s. 16 4s and 4 6s and 128 balls. 175 not out was the score of Kapil Dev. And he says, the first century by an Indian in one-day internationals in ODIs. And he says, 175 not out. I came back and he says, single-handedly I turned the match around. Single-handedly I won the match for India. And he says, that day, when I came to the dressing room, one change happened. And that change was, my word became the law in the dressing room. Everybody lined up behind me. And now they were willing to listen. And he says, yes, that is how I wanted, because now we are in the semis. And he says, now we were a team, we were one team. And I was the true leader, the actual leader, the authentic leader of the team now. He says, a very strong English team in the semi-finals. We beat them. And in the finals, a mighty West Indies. Clive Lloyd's West Indies, that West Indies which is rated as one of the greatest teams all India, all time in the annals of cricket. Clive Lloyd's West Indies team. He says we beat them on the 25th of June, 1983. History was created. India won the World Cup. for the first time, the Prudential Cup for the first time. That set off a revolution, an evolution of cricket in India. From the cities, cricket went to the small towns. And after that, cricket has never been the same again. Friends, today we are a world power in cricket. Number one or number two in all the three formats of cricket, whether it is test matches, one-day internationals or T20s. But we look at the root, the moot, the nucleus, the epicenter, the pericenter, the nerve center was that historic day, 25th of June, 1983. And actually, 18th of June, 1983, Tunbridge Wells, when Kapil Dev says, I actually became the captain of my team. E number 3 of leadership was demonstrated by Kapil Dev that day, that is edge, cutting edge, the skill level of the leader. On the screen in front of you, friends, we come down, the last bullet point, command versus demand. A leader cannot demand respect. He cannot say, respect me, team. He has to command respect. That is the mark of a leader. And that is only when he can perform. He can set the right example. He can lead from the front. And that is when he can perform the function. Many times we are guilty. We feel we have become leaders. Now we don't have to perform. A sales leader feels he doesn't need to sell anymore. A production leader feels he doesn't need to do production anymore. They take a back seat. Their cutting edge becomes blunt. When that happens, they lose the respect of their team members. A leader has got to continuously upgrade himself so that the team members look up to him. Can I become like my leader? That is how they look up. They admire him. They respect him. They accept him. That is when the buy-in of the leader happens. Otherwise, the leader remains leader only on paper. Well, friends, the mental chat of the team members as regards the leader should be, can I become like my leader? Can I copy my leader? Can I copy him? Imitate him? Emulate him? Replicate him? Duplicate him? And then we know that this is a leader who's commanding respect. He has to upgrade himself, train himself. Train his team members also. Bring them up in their skill level so that they perform against all odds in all conditions. At the same time, upgrade himself so that they continue to admire him. E number 3, edge. Another son of India, or when we say, friends, E number 3, that is edge. We mentioned this. As I say this, there is a couplet which is coming to my mind. I am reminded of these 2 lines, which again I devote to all these great leaders of India and this wonderful audience in front of me. मिलेगी मंजिल यकीनन उन्हें, मिलेगी मंजिल यकीनन उन्हें, परिंदे खुद नहीं उनके फैले हुए पर बोलते। मिलेगी मंजिल यकीनन उन्हें, परिंदे खुद नहीं उनके फैले हुए पर बोलते। खामोश रहते हैं जमाने में अक्सर, खामोश रहते हैं जमाने में अक्सर वो, खुद नहीं जमाने में जिनके हुनर बोलते। बात उसी हुनर की है, काबिलियत की है, कार्यशीलता की है, कुशलता की है, कौशल्य की है, सामर्थ्य की है। It is about our skill levels as leaders, our cutting edge. E number 4, execute. Another son of India. I said we devote this to our great motherland, Hindustan. Admiral S.M. Nanda, the man who bombed Karachi. This is the autobiography. He was the Admiral of Indian Navy in 1971 when the Indo-Pak War took place. What does he write in his autobiography? He says, 1965 war, India and Pakistan. Indian Navy had no role. Even the Pakistani Navy had no role. So he says, tension was rising. October of 1971, I was called by the Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi. She called me and she said, Admiral Nanda, Indian Navy, 1965, you had no role to play. There can be war at any time. Will the Indian Navy do something this time, or will it remain a white elephant as it was in 1965? He says, I was stung by her words. But the Prime Minister was known for her acidic tongue. He says, I looked at her, I gathered my wits, and I said, Madam Prime Minister, 1965, the Indian Navy was not given permission to get involved in the war. But this time, if we are given permission, and when you ask me this question, I know I have your permission, madam. I can promise you that I shall create the biggest bonfire in the history of Asia. He says, I was upset. I got up and I walked towards the door of the conference hall. Opening the door, I looked back at her and I asked her, Madam, so I believe I have your permission now. She nodded and he says, I had her permission. It was the 5th of October 1971. He says, I called my second in command, Ravi Sani, Vice Admiral, and I began my preparations. My aim was one, that was Naval Headquarters of Pakistan. Pakistan, we know Army Headquarters, Rawalpindi, Air Force Headquarters, Peshawar, and Naval Headquarters, Karachi. And he says, my plan began. It was the attack on Karachi. Minute by minute, second by second, nautical mile by nautical mile, my planning was made. And he says, what helped me was the fact that I had spent my childhood in Karachi. Born 1919, Admiral Nanda, Rawalpindi, Punjab, Chakwal village. He says, my father was posted in the Indian Postal Services. Posted in Karachi, I had spent my childhood playing in the port of Karachi. I knew the port inside out and outside in. And he says, my plan was ready on the 10th of October 1971. We were waiting, he says, for war to break out. 3rd of December, Operation Changez Khan, launched by Pakistan, and he says, my plan went into action. It was the night of 4th of December, 1971. Operation Trident was the name. And here he says, Karachi has got a natural gift. The only port in the world that has got natural gates. The gates have got to be opened up. If they are closed, ships cannot pass. Only small boats, thin boats, scull boats can pass. And he says, I knew this because we had done this as children, moving in and out, racing around the port of Karachi. I knew they would be smart. And he said, that is what happened. When war broke out, 3rd of December, he says, Operation Trident on the night of 4th of December, we were ready. We were proactive. We reached out, we went out, and the port of Oka, he says, Gujarat, Saurashtra was our launch pad. He says, we couldn't enter Karachi port. I knew that they will be smart. They will be relaxed. They will be complacent in their thought process that nobody can enter the port of Karachi. But he says, I knew that boats can. So he says, not ships, I had chosen boats. And my boats were what? They were boats used by the Coast Guard. They were called as missile boats. They were called missile boats not because they had missiles, but because they moved very swiftly. Their range was only 70 kilometers, but they were very swift to hold back smugglers. And he says 3 missile boats, INS Nipat, INS Nirghat, and INS Nirbhik were chosen by me. These 3 missile boats were converted into actual missile boats. We loaded surface to surface Stykes missiles on them. They became heavy, but nevertheless their speed was almost intact. And then he says, what was our master stroke? We used 2 big warships of India, INS Kachal, INS Kiltan, and these missile boats were pulled behind them. They were towed by these ships. The warships were huge and the missile boats were tiny. They were puny in front of those ships. And he says the warships reached at a distance of 25 kilometers from Karachi. They halted because they were sighted by the radars. And the warships are massive. But he says the radars got transfixed over them. And from beneath the shadows of the warships slipped in our missile boats. INS Nirghat was first. Went through the gates because it was a scull boat. And there he says the ships, the huge warships of Pakistan were there in front of us and they were sitting down. The first target, he says, of the Stykes missile was PNS Khyber. And he says PNS Khyber within 5 minutes was moving towards his watery grave. Next was PNS Shah Jahan. Next was PNS Nakhuda. Next was PNS Khuda Gawah. Next was the cargo carrier, which was the Venus Challenger. And finally was the biggest warship of Pakistan, PNS Dhaka, which was bombed. The daylights were bombed out of them. And all these 6 warships, these great warships, these big warships, these major warships, were sent to their watery graves by a small Indian missile. They came back. 2,200 lives were lost by the Pakistani sailors. Half of their navy was destroyed. Their morale was destroyed completely. And what did we lose? We lost only 2 sailors. 2 manpower lost by our side. That is what we call as execution. Master execution. Master stroke execution. 4th of December 1971. The biggest naval victory in the last 500 years which I would want all of us to know and share with our team members, declared as Navy Day by India. But he said, we do not stop over there because I had taken a pledge, a promise, an oath which I had not redeemed still. And he says, 7th of December, we launched Operation Python. And this time our launch pad was Porbandar. Our aim was not Karachi, but the oil refinery next to Karachi, 10 kilometers, Kimari. I had played hide and seek. Their oil tanks were over there. I knew that, says Admiral Nanda in his autobiography. INS Talwar was the warship we used. INS Vinash was the missile boat. But there were no missile boats because this time we did the same thing. Vinash reached out 20 kilometers off Karachi, it stopped. And once again we slipped in, and this time not to Karachi, but to Kimari. And these were oil tanks. Only one bullet was enough. And the bullet called a spark. Spark became a flame. Flame became an inferno. Inferno became a raging inferno. And Kimari was burning for 7 days. The tankers were burning for 7 days. The refineries were burning for 7 days. Karachi was burning for 7 days. Karachi was smoldering for 7 days. The citizens of Karachi did not see the sun for 7 days. And he says, my promise, my oath, my pledge was redeemed to the Prime Minister. I had created the biggest bonfire in history. The oil tankers burned at Kimari, 20 billion US dollars lost by Pakistan. One of the major reasons why they surrendered. No oil for their tanks, for their factories, for their aeroplanes, for their own people. Well, friends, this is what we call as the mark of a great leader. We are talking of the ability to execute. And here comes, what is execution? A good leader should be able to deliver results. Theory is one thing, practical is another. Giving results is what is expected. As I said, the mark is performance. A leader should understand the ground reality. Priorities should be clear. The broad strategy should be there in his mind. Break up this strategy into smaller tactics, and then have the right man for the right place, for the right time, step by step. That is how results are delivered. And this is what sets the leader apart, because that is what everybody asks for. What are the results? How has performance gone up? Can you show us that? 40. We come to the 50. Standing at Dubai airport, I saw this book, friends. I had 3 hours, The Greatest Company in the World, written by Peter Casey. And I started thinking. By the time I said 3 hours over here at the airport, 4-hour flight to Bombay, 7 hours I'll finish off this book. What is it about Google, about Microsoft, about Coke, about Pepsi, about Marlboro, about Mercedes? But then, curiosity, I picked up the book. I pulled it up. And here it was, the story of Tata. My heart welled up, my heart swelled up with pride standing there at the Dubai airport as an Indian. Peter Casey doesn't belong to India, doesn't work for the Tata Group. Management guru born in UK, settled in Atlanta, US, knows and has worked with the major corporations of the world. And he says, there is something unique in the Tata Group, which sets it apart from every other group in the world. Half the book he devotes to that factor which is unique, and that is the TCOC, the Tata Code of Conduct. He says the priorities are defined over here for the group. No other group has got a code of conduct, he says. He says priorities, number 1 for the Tata Group, ethics, honesty, integrity, nation, environment, employees, associates, and priority number 8, profits. He says every organization, every corporation runs after profits. But profits run after the Tata Group because their priorities are in place. J.R.D. Tata, the leader who introduced the TCOs, the Code of Conduct. 1938, he took charge of the Tata Group, struggling under British rule. 1991, he relinquished, retired, gave charge to Ratan Tata. 53 years, and Tata Group had become a powerhouse. India before 91 was a socialist economy. License Raj, bribes was the order of the day. But then he said no. The Code of Conduct says no bribes allowed. The ethics was set in place. He says everybody told me your group will collapse. But he says I believe in the values. And we see the results. Now not only a national powerhouse, under Ratan Tata it's an international powerhouse. As I said, it is the values. A leader stands for values. E number 5, that is ethics. Set the right example. Integrity, honesty. A leader can never become suspect, he will lose respect. When we talk of values, what a leader can instill is the attitude of excellence, which we can instill in our people. Chalta hai is something which is eating away at the base, at the very bedrock of our country. But we are a rising country where we instill this value of excellence. Whatever you do, my friends, we can tell our team members. You could be a driver, you could be a sweeper, you could be a corporate leader, you could be an astronaut, you could be a sportsman, you could be a boxer, you could be a speaker, you could be a trainer. Strive for only one thing, and that is excellence. We don't compromise. Chalta hai will not work. Second is corruption. If we instill this value in our people, now we at least individually take the effort to stop corruption. Once again, our country will move towards becoming the greatest even faster. Somewhere the beginning has got to be made. We've been at the receiving end of corruption. Jaichand and his corruption, and the Mughals came into India. Mir Jafar and Siraj-ud-Dawla and the British were able to entrench themselves into India. And that was the loot. When we say corruption, this lies, backstab, fraud, conceit, deceit, subterfuge, perfidy, all this will end as long when corruption ends. E number 5, that is ethics. My friends, here we are, V plus 5E. The algorithm, vision, energy, energize, edge, execute, and ethics. And as I said, who can stop us? And who can stop our country? I repeat once again, a country of performers is a performing country. A country of achievers is an achieving country. A country of winners is a winning country. A country of leaders is a leading country. And a country of great automatically qualifies to become a great country. Great. Today, Goldman and Sachs, McKinsey's, Boston Consulting Group. What do they say about our country today? Work in progress, our economy, our GDP. They say we are number 5 in the world today. Projection for the future, 2025, we will be in the top 3 economies. India, America, and China. 2050 in the top 2, India and China. And 2067, they say we will be over there. Where? The top, the peak, the pinnacle, the zenith of the world economic order, economic power, economic powerhouse, number 1 economy of the world can be in. So friends, we will be becoming the number 1 economy in the world. But there is one more thing. Will we gain this position or will we regain this position? That is also something which I must share with you, great leaders in front of you. Here in front of you, we see a golden bird. Sone ki chidi. My grandmother used to tell me, our country was a golden सोने की चिड़िया. दूध और शहद की नदियां यहाँ पे बहा करती थी इंडिया में. That is what my grandmother told me once. I smiled. I thought she is making herself happy, imagining the past, romanticizing the past, popularizing the past, lionizing the past, eulogizing the past. She is making herself happy. But then I realized that I was wrong and she was right. Your friends, on the screen in front of you are the results of A.J. Madison, economic historian. What was the size of the past economies? That is his forte. He also is not an Indian, he's an Englishman. If you see, look over here, from 1000 AD to 1700 AD, our contribution to the world economy was how much? Almost 30% to 25%. We were 1/3 of the world economy at that time. And today, America is 14% of the world economy. And we say it is an economic powerhouse. And we were almost 30%, 1/3 of the world economy. That was the might, that was the globe, that was the impact of India in 1000 AD. Well, friends, but then what happened to India? Why did we become poor? We are rising now. We are work in progress now. Therefore, we say we can make a difference as leaders. What happened to India? Yes, again, the answer is with Madison. And here, friends, is the answer what happened to India. Here it is in front of you. How our contribution to the world economy declined. But you look at the third row, our area under British domination. 1757, Battle of Plassey and the British came into India. And that is when their kingdom in India started increasing. As you can see, as our area under British domination increases, our contribution to the world economy decreases. As that increases step by step, we become poorer, our economy becomes smaller, our GDP becomes smaller. By the time it was 1900, we were 1.7%. By the time it was 1947, from around 25%, one fourth of the world economy, friends, we had become only 0.5%. 1947, when we gained independence, we were one of the poorest countries in the world, one of the most impoverished countries in the world, one of the most poverty stricken countries in the world. That is what we become. 150 years from a country that was one of the most advanced. Our finished products, our goods, our castings, our forgings, our spices, our arts, our articrafts, our artisans, our silk, our cotton, our muslin, everything was exported to all corners of the world. Our finished goods went across the world. That is still as much as 1750. But in those 100 years, 150 years, we were deindustrialized by our colonial masters, by our white masters, by our European masters, by our English master. We were deindustrialized. We were colonized. From a manufacturer of finished goods, we became a supplier of raw materials. We became a dumping ground for the raw materials. Many times, they're substandard raw materials, and we paid a price. We became one of the poorest. But from 1947, from zero point 0.5, we are rising once again. And as says Goldman and Sachs, as says McKinsey's, as says Boston Consulting Group, we have reached number 5 in the world. Well, friends, we are on our way. We are work in progress, and we have to rise. We have to move to where we actually are destined to go. But that is where our country needs to grow at 8.5% per annum. That is where all the fields, all the sectors need good guidance. They need good leadership, and that is where people who can influence their minds will play a role. That is where leaders will play a role. That is where impactful leaders will play a role. That is where effective leaders will play a role. That is where performance-oriented leaders will play a role. That is where leaders who believe in 5V plus 5E are going to play a role. That is where we are going to play a role, friends. Great leaders, all of us in front of me. So let us give this leadership. Our algorithm V plus 5V. We work on the performance. We become great, and we take our country towards its aim, its goal, its destiny, its destination, which is the greatest. Friends, major responsibility with us. And I know that we can execute it very nicely. As I say, as leaders, this power is vested within us, it is vested within us. We just have to take it out, as we say, unbind this power, unchain this power, unshackle this power, unlock this power, unbottle this power, unsheath this power, and finally unleash this power and take our country towards becoming the greatest. And friends, even before I end my seminar or my talk with this wonderful audience, I am reminded also of a couplet, which once again I dedicate to our great country and this great audience in front of me. That is, a lot has to be done. And we are the ones who are the catalyst who can do this. जिंदगी की असली उड़ान तो अभी बाकी है. जिंदगी की असली उड़ान तो अभी बाकी है. इरादों का असली इम्तिहान तो अभी बाकी है. जिंदगी की असली उड़ान तो अभी बाकी है. इरादों का असली इम्तिहान तो अभी बाकी है. अभी तो नापी है कुछ 2 मुट्ठी जमीन. अभी तो नापी है कुछ 2 मुट्ठी जमीन हमने. सारा आसमान जीतना तो अभी बाकी. Right, friends, thank you so much.